Chapter 19. My brother has learned of monsters, monster slayers, and tradition, but he has not yet recognized himself as part of the legend, and he is running out of time. Grandfather feels my brother must be reminded again. He must understand his place. The small town of Agate was almost completely dark. Except for the streetlights and the store lighting that was still on automatically, the place looked like a ghost town. Which, Nakai supposed, it was. Nakai looked over his shoulder at a place where he had spent a lot of time. He knew that most of the people had left, but he also knew that it was the way of things that a lot of people would stay. If he went into some of these old familiar buildings, how many bodies would he find? How many more of his friends would he see ripped and shredded by a creature that he would never have believed could exist a week before? Nakai made himself turn back to the colonel. He stood at ease, waiting for the colonel to finish with assignments. He had been waiting for some time now. The colonel had called him aside especially, and Nakai was not pleased about it. He had felt that he belonged with Major Lee, in the desert, finding the tracks of the creature. Yet the colonel had stopped that order for a reason that Nakai had yet to understand. With luck, the understanding would come soon. It would be better not to let the trail of the creature grow too cold. Nakai still wasn't quite sure how the creature got past him. Even knowing that the thing was powerful hadn't been enough. Nakai had overestimated his own abilities, his own strengths. He had thought it would take a single concentrated attack to bring the thing down. He was wrong. He needed to focus to come up with a better plan, and he wasn't sure how to do that. He had a feeling, though, that the colonel's plan was too orderly, too structured. This creature, for all its monstrous looks, had courage and intelligence. It had outsmarted humans at every turn, almost as if it had known what to expect. "Corporal," the colonel said, turning to Nakai, almost as an afterthought. "You and Tilden patrol the town to the west." The colonel started to turn away, but Nakai stopped him. "Begging the colonel's pardon, sir," he said. The colonel turned, his eyes cold. Nakai suppressed a sigh. What was it about him that angered every officer he ever worked with? He had pointed this guy to the creature. He had set up the attack. Now the colonel was turning him away, as if he had done something wrong. Nakai didn't care. He needed to be in the desert, going after that creature. "Shouldn't I," Nakai continued, "be helping track the monster?" "No, son," the colonel said. "You shouldn't." He took a deep breath, and his face softened slightly. "I imagine you lost quite a few friends when your base was destroyed. Firing that missile into that building lets me understand that you want revenge, and just a little too much for all our good. It's understandable, but it's my policy to have men with personal vendettas removed from active duty." The colonel took a step closer and softened his voice even more so that the others couldn't hear. "I can't remove you from duty, son. Hell, you've done a lot for us. Getting us this close to the menace is medal country, in my opinion. But now I've got to stop you from ruining your own good work. I want you here in town with me. Understood?" Nakai didn't understand. He started to object, but he could see in the colonel's eyes that to do so would only make things worse. "Yes, sir," he said. "Good," the colonel said. "Now you and Tilden take up your positions. We don't know if that thing is going to circle back or not." It was a bit of a gift, a way of saying that Nakai's job wasn't as unimportant as it seemed. But both men knew it wasn't true. That monster was done with Agate. It was looking for fresh blood. Nakai managed not to say another word as he saluted, snapped around, and headed west down the main street. Private Tilden dropped in beside him. They walked the length of the main part of town in silence. Agate was empty, completely empty. Nakai had always wondered why people stayed in this god-forsaken place, but now that they were gone, he felt bad, almost as if he personally had suffered a loss. He hadn't realized he was so attached to the place. When they reached the abandoned railway warehouse that marked the edge of this part of town, Tilden spoke. Nakai, who had been lost in his own thoughts, had to turn, frown, and concentrate. "What?" he asked. Tilden smiled. "I was just saying that you shouldn't take it so bad, Corporal. After all, you led us to the thing. You did your duty." Nakai rolled his eyes, glad that Tilden couldn't see their expression in the darkness. Why was it that every time he had a setback, people told him he had done enough? His duty was the last thing at the moment he cared about. All he wanted to do was stop the monster. "Let Major Lee and his boys do the rest," Tilden said. "I hear the Colonel is flying in Major Amblin and his elite combat unit to go after the final kill." "Great," was all Nakai could say. He jumped up on the loading dock, the old wood creaking under his feet. He scanned the surrounding area, finding exactly what he had expected. Nothing. The night was still warm, and the street lights cast long shadows along the road. Just paces from where they stood, the desert stretched off into the distance, black under the star-filled night sky. The darkness was like an invitation. He could easily move out into that blackness and disappear. But he couldn't, because he would have to live with himself. "Say," Tilden said, climbing up on the dock, "isn't Nakai a Navajo name?" "Yeah," Nakai said, still scanning the darkness. "Finally, a red brother," Tilden said. "What?" Nakai turned to face the other man. "Well, not exactly brothers," Tilden said, laughing at Nakai's fierce expression. "I'm Zuni." Nakai nodded, relaxing a little. "My girlfriend's Zuni." "Small world," Tilden said. "For natives, anyway." "Yeah." Nakai held his rifle across his chest and leaned across the rough wood of the old warehouse, facing out over the desert. "Not many of us in this army," Tilden went on, "though that's no surprise. My dad hit the roof when I told him I was joining up. How'd your folks take it?" "I was raised by my grandfather," Nakai said. "Damn, that must have been worse." Tilden shook his head. "Older folks really don't understand." Nakai nodded, looking off into the darkness, remembering the day he had told his grandfather he was joining the army. It was 3 years before, almost exactly to the day. The day had been hot, even for the desert. Grandfather had been in his medicine tent. The temperature inside had been 10 degrees hotter than outside, but Grandfather didn't seem to notice. The old man never seemed to notice either the heat of the summer or the bitter cold of the winter. Nakai had ducked inside, standing for a moment with his back to the entrance, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. Grandfather was sitting on the floor, a drawing in the dirt in front of him. By Nakai's tribe, Grandfather was considered Yattali, the medicine man. He supposedly had great power, but Nakai had never seen any of it actually help them. "Grandfather," Nakai had said, "I have something to tell you. It's important." "And I would like to tell you something," Grandfather replied. "Do you see this figure here?" He pointed at a figure inside a triangle, inside a larger circle. Nakai only nodded. He was familiar with the drawing. It was the symbolic drawing of Nayenezgani, the monster slayer. Nakai had seen the drawing hundreds of times. Grandfather pointed to another drawing in the larger circle. "Tobajishni, another of the hero twins," he said. "Nayenezgani's twin brother. They both play an important part in the night way." Nakai had heard it all before. "Grandfather, please, I must tell you something." But Grandfather seemed to ignore him. Without both twins, the evil cannot be banished. One must distract the monster, while the other kills it. Nakai shook his head and decided just to press on. Grandfather, before I went down to the recruitment office, I gave a lot of thought to what you said. You know, about being Navajo, and that it wasn't just in your blood, but in your heart and the way you acted. Grandfather simply chanted softly over the drawing. I just want you to know, Nakai continued, that no matter what you think, in my heart I will always be Navajo. I am Yattali, Grandfather said. My people need my help to fight the evil, just as I need the help of the hero twins. Nayenezgani must help me, or none of us will succeed. Grandfather, Nakai said, his voice almost pleading, please stop and listen to me. I know what you are saying. I've heard it before. I understand. His grandfather, for the first time, looked up at Nakai, deep knowledge shining through his dark eyes. And in a very firm voice he said, Do you, grandson? Do you really know it? In your heart, as well as your head? And that was how it ended. Nakai had no answer. He had left the next day for boot camp, and 3 weeks later his grandfather had died, sitting above the drawing of Nayenezgani.